Don't be in the dark. Be aware of what is happening in your profession, in your role. Be aware of your disruption risk. That's number one. Number two is start building those capabilities. You've got two kinds of things you need to build. One is the human part of you to amplify that and make it brilliant. Strengthen what makes you indispensable. And then the second part of that is you've got to develop those technical digital capabilities like prompting and using AI, because that's not going to go away. It's just going to intensify. So two parts of capability building. And then the third part is be more independent and show more initiative and start applying these tools to disrupt yourself, to disrupt your job, to disrupt your business so that it doesn't happen to you.
So welcome to the Hitchhiker's Guide to AI Governance, the podcast for anyone trying to make sense of intelligent machines, messy politics and everything in between. But don't panic. Today I stop to give a ride to Pamela Frost. Pamela is the founder and CEO of Adapt and Thrive, a multi-tool, multi-layered AI platform enabling people to realise their potential and develop the capabilities required to navigate an emerging future. Before teaching herself to code, Pamela developed 30 years of expertise across capability assessment, talent management, career transition coaching, leadership development, and employee engagement. Pamela's tools enable people to disrupt themselves ahead of the AI displacement curve. G'day, Pamela.
Hello, Bruce. How are you? Thank you for inviting me.
I'm going really well. How's your week been so far?
Pretty busy, actually. I've got some applications for some venture capital funds that I'm putting in at the moment, so it's exciting times.
And whereabouts are you in this fine, beautiful day?
I'm based in Melbourne, in Surrey Hills.
Okay, so Melbourne, Australia. So what in the world do we want to talk about? How about worker displacement? Where do we start with that? What are you seeing, Pamela?
It's such a big topic and it's so important. So my area of passion is technology, and particularly emerging technologies like generative AI, robotics, what that means for people's careers, for work structures, for what capability, what it means for their livelihood. So there's just so much in the news at the moment and so much being spoken about. And I think generally speaking, there's such a range in people's reactions to technology. Some people are really quite worried and quite concerned, and others are more gung-ho and really working quickly and fast to leverage technology. So I'm working across that whole spectrum. So it's a really good time to have this conversation with you.
So a report dropped from government this week, and it was a really interesting report. It talks about the impact of AI on jobs in Australia. And there's some good news in the report, and that is that there has not been a significant or noticeable impact of AI on those jobs that are most exposed.
Yes.
So what are you seeing, or what are you hearing about job displacement specifically, and what types of jobs are you seeing that people are impacted by?
Okay, when it comes to AI and jobs, one of the things to look at is what's the kind of impact to consider in the first place. So with AI technology, it depends on the kind of work. So if you could write a standard procedure for your job, meaning there's kind of structured process, step by step, do this, then that, do this, then that, that role is very, very high risk of automation through an algorithm of AI. So the risk for those kind of roles, whether they're call center or advisory or data entry, bookkeeping, all of those sorts of roles have very high risk for displacement. But there's another category where technology, it doesn't necessarily replace the role. What it does is augments the role. So it's a tool that can be used to enable you to be more efficient, to be more productive, to be able to problem solve quicker and so forth. So that's not necessarily displacing, but it's certainly disrupting. And it's those sorts of jobs. Businesses are needing people who have the technology capability as well as the human machine augmentation capability to be able to work with the tech to extract the greatest value. I think the issue with the labour market statistics is it's very early days. When we consider AI adoption, there was some recent research that Anthropic, so They produce the platform Claude, if people are familiar with Claude. They produce some recent data, and the AI adoption rate is probably sitting at about 5% of what is potential. So when we talk about job displacement, let's just say it's early days. And the labour market statistics are always retrospective. They're not necessarily prospective. So the impacts, they vary. Some industries are more exposed, whereas others, are less risk.
It's a good thing about the report that dropped from the Department of Industry here in Australia is that it provided examples of the top jobs that in 5 different categories, those that were least exposed to those that were most exposed. So to give you an example of the types of things where people would be least exposed would be someone who's an aged and disability carer, and maybe an electrician, a child carer, a commercial cleaner, carpenter, plumber, gardener, those kind of roles are the least likely to be disrupted. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we've got retail managers, accountants, receptionists, project administrators, purchasing and supply logistics admin, advertising and marketing people, checkout operators at supermarkets, and general clerical staff. They're the most exposed.
Yes.
So when we think about what types of people do those jobs, well, we know that in the construction industry, 90% of the people are male. But we also know that in the health industry, 90% of the workers are female. So who's most likely in terms of men or women to be impacted by the march of AI?
Well, okay, for a start, those industries that you talked about, clerical, call centre, retail, they are female dominated.
Yep.
That is why women proportionally compared to men are probably more at risk of AI disruption. I want to go back to what you said initially about the roles which are least disrupted. You described gardeners and cleaners and aged care workers. There's a few things about that. Let me just say AI, in terms of the technology, I think the greatest risk is for those roles that use this big muscle in the middle of this brain here in terms of our intellectual capability. Other roles which are using intellectual capability but in conjunction with our human skills, so our relationship skills and our caring skills and support, they are less at risk because that AI currently is less effective at displacing the human side of work. Cleaners, gardeners, they're doing physical work. So they're still using their brain. So whilst they may not face disruption from AI technology, it doesn't mean that robotic technology won't cause them disruption. It's just a different kind of technology. But when it comes to AI, the biggest category of risk is women who are 40 to 60 age group who are white collar knowledge workers. And these women, it's an interesting category for them because these women have faced age discrimination, they've faced gender bias, and now what they're facing is this very, very clever, superior or growing superior intelligence called AI, which is kind of like saying, look, I'm going to do that part of your job and I'm going to do it much faster, and I'm not going to get sick, and I'm not going to answer back, and I'm not going to get tired. I'm going to be relentless, and I'm going to continue to do it. So those aspects of work are being disrupted.
It's interesting because you talk about the amount of thinking someone does in a role. And so in this report, they defined 2 types. One is if you do routine cognitive tasks, such as receptionist or a keyboard operator, versus non-routine cognitive tasks, where human judgment and insight is really important.
Yes.
So that's how they define it. So what's the result of all of this? If people are hearing this in the podiverse, that these are the jobs that are potentially going to be exposed, what might they be thinking and feeling at the moment?
They're in a role where perhaps their organisation hasn't adopted any AI technology. They're in an area where there's very little exposure right now. So they're feeling in their comfort zone. They're feeling quite safe, quite secure, and they're not worried about it. Or they're thinking, look, I'm 55, this is not going to bother me, this is not going to happen for the next 10 years, I'm going to be fine, I'm just going to retire. So you could have people in that category. Then you've got people who are extremely worried, very, very worried about technology, because there's an interesting paradox. And the paradox is the more you use technology, the more you start to play with it and you're prompting and starting to experiment, two things happen. Your confidence with what the technology can do increases. So it can create all of this curiosity and wonder and, oh, wow, and I didn't know could do that, and this is possible. So it increases confidence, but there's a really interesting duopoly there because it also increases anxiety. And I call it the OMG. It's like, okay, once you realize what's possible, you also realize what it can do and what the employer can do with it. And you start to think, well, if it can do that, what does this mean for me? And am I necessary anymore? Is my job safe? All of that sort of stuff. So there's a huge amount of anxiety, and that shows up in the workplace in a number of different ways. But then if we go to the other end of the spectrum, you have people who they're not worried about technology at all. They are, I can't wait for this to happen. Bring it on. I am so excited because I've been waiting for a long time for this, and I've got really boring parts of my job which I can't wait to automate because it enables me to have freed up capacity so that I can do more creative things. I can do more strategic things. I can, do more design aspects or come up with new products or new ways of working. So you got people on all ends of the spectrum. And my work is about supporting people to move along that spectrum so that they are ahead of the curve. So your introduction about disrupt yourself, what I mean by that is it's about disrupting this fixed idea that you have around your professional identity. So no longer seeing yourself as I'm a bookkeeper or I'm an accountant or I'm an engineer or a digital marketing specialist. It's I am capable of a whole lot of things, and technology enables me to express that capability in many different facets, which is why we use this symbol of a diamond. It's a brilliant cut diamond, and it's about illuminating capability, illuminating what is possible for you, whether that's in your own professional role, you might be an independent consultant, or it might be working for an employer, but that's what it's about.
So I want to throw a scenario at you, and I'd just love to know what your advice would be in this situation. So I was leading a project about a year or so ago. We were automating the data entry and processing of invoices using a AI tool. There was 180 sites processing 50,000 invoices a year. That would have a significant effect on maybe 150 people across the organisation, and including people whose full-time job it was just to process invoices. Now, the people that were doing that on a full-time basis, they wanted to know what their future would look like. And being a project manager of many years, I could sense that there was anxiety there, but I also wasn't sure myself about how this technology was actually going to play out. I didn't know whether we would go down to 2 people, whether we would need to have the same number of people, but redeploying them into different tasks. I was hedging my bets because I didn't know what the future looked like. Now, because I couldn't give them an answer, and I was being honest with them because I didn't actually know how effective and efficient this new way of working would be and what that would mean for their roles, which was the genuine truth. When we get to 2,500 suppliers, $82 million spend, there is so much opportunity in that spend to optimize it that, in the first few weeks of the project, I reckon we saved one full head count just in identifying spend that we didn't need to have to make. So because we were saving money, plus also automating, plus doing all these other things, I didn't quite know what that future would look like. So they weren't satisfied with that, which is fair enough. And so they asked the CFO what was happening to our jobs. And the CFO told them that at the end of the 6-month implementation period for the project, they were going to be made redundant. Now, what happened after that? You tell me what you think happened, and I can tell you if that's actually what happened.
Well, you're probably going to get widespread panic as a
Yeah.
result of that. Like if
Yeah.
you're being told, like what you're pointing out is a scenario where you're saying the business is automating processes, and we're asking you staff to contribute and be part of this and go along with the journey to automate our workforce. And your reward for that at the end of it is we're going to make you redundant. So kind of like psychologically, I could imagine that you're really not going to get very much engagement. You're going to get the opposite. You're going to get fear, you're going to get anxiety, you're going to get disengagement, sabotage, whole range of reactions is what's going to happen.
So that's
Is that what
exactly what happened.
happened?
Pamela, you've nailed it. Exactly.
Yeah.
So the very next day, everyone was on sick leave. So we weren't getting invoices processed because people were sick. Then they were taking medical leave for operations. It was a whole range of different things. The environment was changed enormously to along the lines of a toxic workplace. And I had no control over that. And that made my job 10 times harder because then I had to do the same amount of work or more, but with less people.
Yeah.
If you were the CFO and those people had come to you, what would you have told them?
Look, I think to answer that properly, I think we need to take a step back before that. And that
Yep.
is with these projects, these technology projects, they need to be handled very carefully and very sensitively. So sometimes with human machine augmentation, the machine part of it, like the business efficiency and the drive and how we do it and the processes and optimization, all of that sort of stuff gets all the resources, gets all of the time and all of the attention. The human side of it, the capability building, the engagement, the emotional journey that we're asking people to go on, that sort of stuff, if it gets dealt with, if HR even gets involved, more often than not, they're not involved at the outset. They're involved right at the end. When you've got the proverbial hits the fan, that's when they get called in to do kind of like damage control and how do we deal with this and all of this sort of stuff. So the first thing I'd say is you need to involve in your change management process. You need to be thinking about this up front. Now, a few things you said that you said to staff, look, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not sure what there's going to be with redundancies. That's like telling the truth. No one has a crystal ball. I've got a diamond. It's not a crystal ball. No one has a crystal ball to work out exactly what's going to happen because, of course, even with technology projects, there's a lot of failed projects. They get implemented, they go and lay staff off, and then they find that the technology is causing more work, more rework, because it's making mistakes and they have to go and recruit people again. There is no crystal ball. But I think when it comes to giving people respect, like people are anxious because they are observing what's happening in other companies, what's happening in other industries, maybe what's happened in your own company because there's history there of redundancy. When it comes to worker dignity, it's about being transparent. It's about being honest. And it's also about involvement. So if the intentions of your change management are right up front that there will be some roles that get made redundant, but that doesn't mean you person, Barbara or Marianne, are going to be made redundant. What we want to do is involve you in the process to see what parts of this can you disrupt. What parts of this do you need to build capability to learn how to use these tools so that you upskill? And so you're involving them in that journey. You're collaborating with your employees to participate in that journey, to co-create, these changes that you need to make rather than have it imposed on them and, have them be in a situation where, they're sort of like given false no hope because you're going to get made redundant at the end of the 6 months.
I really liked how you started. Your response was take a step back, and then you said, let's understand the human side of this, not just the business imperative of doing things more efficiently and more effectively. And that's the starting point. So rather than HR coming in at the end for damage control,
Yes.
they come in at the beginning. Now,
Yes.
we knew in the business case because I wrote the business case for this particular project, we knew that there would be a redundancy. The organisation was previously a transactional focus. Let's just get these invoices paid. So when you've got $82 million of spend, the question is different. If we've got something like a machine processing those invoices for us. Perhaps we can look at the data to see what we're spending and to see how effective our actual spend is. Why are we spending this much over here? What about fraud over here? We had direct debits coming out of our bank accounts automatically on a monthly basis. So when I started in the role, I asked for somebody to show me where were the invoices matched against those direct debits.
Mm-hmm.
And there weren't any because those services had been cancelled years ago, but nobody stopped the direct debit. And that was automatically about $40,000 a year in savings. We enabled Telstra to switch off over 100 mobile phones that were no longer being used. That was $10,000 a year. So as we were going through this process of identifying things that we should and should not be doing and people's roles in that and how that role will change from a transactional processing perspective to, hey, let's actually look at the spend. Let's see what we're doing and whether what we're doing actually makes any sense. That's the picture I was trying to paint about what the skills were that we needed in the future. In the past, we needed people to key in invoices because we didn't have any other way. But now we've got the other way, and now we need people to use their human cognition, judgment, and discernment to look at what the spend was to see if any of that made sense. So when they spoke to me and in my uncertainty about the future, I suggested to them that have a look around. You've got to have a plan B. Now, I also said to them, because some of them were traveling an hour and a half to get into the office. When they had to be in the office, that was an hour and a half trip. And so it's 3 hours a day. So I said, just consider your possibilities. If you didn't have to travel 3 hours a day to get to the office, what would that look like? Now, they took those comments the wrong way.
Okay.
So Bruce was suggesting I should get another job. Now, I don't know whether they were playing games or manipulating or what happened, but my feedback to them was well-intentioned. It was to explore possibilities. I didn't know the answer, but there's a big wide world out there. And that comment about, hey, maybe if you found a job close to home, where you could do this, what you're doing here, but I don't want to work close to home. I want to work here. Didn't sit very well with people. So as a manager, how do you kind of work out when, because you want to be honest, right? You want to be ethical and do the right thing by staff members, but how do you sort of navigate that difficult conversation with people?
As we said before, you can only be truthful, and you don't have the crystal ball. You don't have all of the answers. But I think what works is to have some principles, to operate on the basis of values. So if your values are to respect, your staff, to treat them, as an intelligent, capable people that they are. And this is kind of the interesting thing. We recruit the top talent. We recruit the best people. So we need to treat them like that, treat them as intelligent people and sit down and talk about this and say, look, I understand it's a risk. I understand there's a lot of uncertainty here and a lot of anxiety. But, you create the space for dialogue around that. To say, I'm not saying you need to leave, but what we want to do is upskill your background so that you can be agents in this, that the disruption is not going to be done to you. You can be part of this to work in defining how the processes work, what the technology is going to do, what the job description is going to look like in the future. So they are participants in that rather than recipients of that. That's the kind of engagement or the sovereignty or the agency part of it. But you can't make promises that you don't know what's going to happen unless it already has been decided and that is the plan.
And as they said to me, they couldn't understand why good people were being made redundant. And I said, I know you're a good person. You've been here 15 years. You wouldn't be here 15 years if you weren't. And it's not about you. This is not about you. This decision is not a personal decision. So the other problem that I hear often, particularly from managers and business owners, particularly family-owned businesses, because they've built on the strength of their teams and their staff, that they've had people with them for 20, 30 years. So I went to a local business.
Generations of families.
Yeah, generations, yeah. And, these people have been there for 15, 20 years, just like I had when I was doing that other project. Now, the managers there or the owner there has now got a problem because they know they need to change. They know they can bring in all these tools, because if they don't, they're not going to be competitive with the other organisation next door that does. And how do they navigate this very loyal workforce that they've been together for 20, they know each other inside out? How does that conversation work with you and the employer? What would you be advising the employer to do, or the business owner?
That business owner is in a very compromised position because, as you say, on the one hand, they're running a business, they've got pressures, they've got to grow, they've got to cut costs to stay competitive. So it's about survival and viability of the business. And on the other hand, there's a loyalty towards their staff. And in these cases, these business owners not just know the employees, they probably know their families, their children, they've watched children grow up. So they're going to be experiencing all sorts of turmoil in terms of making this decision. They won't want to make this decision, but they're kind of forced to make this decision. So I think the issue there is, at the end of the day, you're running a business. You have to run a business. It has to be a viable business. So these decisions have to be made, and there will be situations where people get displaced. But it's, if you're going to make that decision, provide the right support for them. Don't provide support which is not going to fix a structural issue. Provide support which is about building capability, building confidence, building hope that their next path is going to be possible, because not all disruption is negative. Sometimes disruption opens up windows, like one door gets closed, but a window gets opened to a possibility they never even considered for themselves. And that's what, technology absolutely can do. But they need support for that. They need capability. They may need coaching. They may need some outplacement support. So provide that support, and don't do it right at the end where, it's kind of like, I have to give you notice, you've got to pack your bags and go. Work with them prior to that. Work with them 2 or 3 or 4 months earlier, in that partnership journey that I spoke about collaboration. Because it could be that some of these employees are actually looking forward to the opportunity to disrupt their job because they want to get rid of the boring stuff. They've got ideas themselves, which they've just been waiting for an opportunity to have permission.
Yeah, I've always wanted to fix this problem. I've never had the chance.
Yeah.
I think in some ways the shift I see that's happening, there's a bigger shift in employee perspective from dependency to independence. And what I mean by that is it works on a number of levels. The dependency is, you tell me what to do, give me a job description, tell me what I'm expected to do, hold me accountable for, whatever I do in an 8-hour period. That's mostly what employees have been trained and conditioned by work to do, be dependent. And what we're asking them to do in some ways is become more independent, show initiative. You destruct yourself. Maybe in the future, be more independent in sourcing work opportunities. That's kind of the shift. And it's not an easy shift for people when all of our work structures reinforce dependency. Well, in terms of capability, the Thrive part of my business name is actually an acronym for the human skill. So the T is the thinking capabilities. So they're the strategic thinking, the systems thinking, the judgment, all of that sort of stuff. The H is the handling, all of the tools that you need to learn. The R is the relationship skills. We're still going to need people to be able to relate. AI, it is incredibly, incredibly powerful and capable. But on a heart-to-heart, human-to-human level, you still need people doing that kind of work. The I is the intuitive. That's the sensing, judging, getting a feel. We all have that gut feel. We all have that sort of knowing. That's the intuitive part. The V is the vision. So imagining. AI cannot imagine. AI cannot dream. Some of my most inspired ideas and, the most creative I ever am is like 2 o'clock in the morning, because I'm having the menopausal can't sleep. 2 to 4 is usually my most creative time, where I just get so many different ideas and thoughts about, I could do this, or this idea pops in my head, whether it's half dream state or whatever. That's where I get a lot of my inspiration. AI doesn't do that. AI cannot imagine. AI cannot conceive. It can only respond to what you ask it. And the E, and this relates to your business, E is the ethics part. The ethical decision making, the governance, like say, for example, just because AI can do this doesn't mean it should. And that's the important role for in your area in governance, is to make those sorts of decisions about what should we be doing? What should we allow AI to do? Because in any business, if you're, say, a director of a business, you have a fiduciary relationship, you have a relationship to shareholders or business owners or whatever, and at the end of the day the buck stops with the human. The human has to be the full stop always with AI, and that's my motto: individual sovereignty. Have sovereignty over AI, human. It is a tool for you to use to amplify your capability, and in a business the human has to be sovereign. They have to have the full stop.
So I really like the Thrive anagram. Can we take us through the T8R again?
Okay, so T is for thinking, H is for handling, so the tools, R is relating, all your interpersonal, emotional intelligence, relationship skills. The I is intuition, so the intuition, sensing, knowing, gut feeling. The V is vision, imagination, storytelling. How do you get, as a leader, how do you inspire people to come with you on your journey? So it's the story, the narratives, using humor. How do you sort of like get people excited and inspired? And the E is the ethics. Going back to the point you raised earlier about anxiety or worker anxiety, do you mind if we look back to that?
Yeah, go for it.
Because anxiety, I see, is showing up in workplaces in a lot of different ways. Showing up in terms of fear, and sort of like worry about job security. Am I going to keep my job? What about my livelihood? It shows up in that way, but it can also show up in another way in terms of worker intensity. So people who are more confident using AI and start using it in their role to do this part and this part better, but they end up working 10 hours a day. They're working 12 hours a day because their underlying anxiety is still about, when am I going to be displaced? But it's survival of the fittest, Darwinian theory, and they're not getting me first. So it's kind of, I need to prove myself. I need to prove how capable I am. And so I'll just do this extra bit and I'll do this extra bit, which is sort of great, I guess, from the employer point of view, but it's also a risk from the employer point of view in terms of cognitive burn, because there's a massive risk of burnout, with that kind of disposition. And the other thing I wanted to talk about is the anxiety of the managers. Like you described it, you were between a rock and a hard place. Middle managers have a really, really difficult journey or a difficult road, because on the one hand, they're the ones that are equipped with the projects to go and implement AI. You go and, roll out this technology software, you go out and analyze the processes and work out which parts can and can't be automated. But at the same time, they're people managers. So they've got to manage not only their own anxiety about what does this mean for me personally, but how do I carry all of the, emotional reactions of my team? And how do I scaffold them and support them and bring them on? So, yeah, they have a challenge.
Yeah. Consider a marketing manager. So in that list of exposed jobs, I had marketing and advertising in there. So you might have a marketing team at the moment that's got one manager and 10 people. Under an AI-oriented world, it might be one manager, 2 humans, and 8 agents, AI agents doing that work. So you've cut 80% of your workforce effectively to deliver the same or more output using a combination of humans and people. So that's a fairly stark reminder of what this future might look like, both for the manager of that team and also for the people in that marketing department.
This is already happening. Businesses who are teams of 10 people are going down to one person because they're using AI agents. Like, for example, I'm in a startup business. 3 years ago, I was very anxious about technology. I come from a career development and career transition background. I come from a capability building background. Not only could I see how it could potentially disrupt my job, but many professions, which is why I was able to move out of that anxiety and use that anxiety as a fuel rather than see it as a hindrance, because that's another thing. Anxiety is seen in business as something that has to be managed, or it's frowned on, or it's a negative. It's actually incredibly powerful if you can harness it, if you can channel it into productive use. Learn the tools, learn, how to use them for your advantage. So less than 2 years ago, I started dabbling with ChatGPT and using various tools. I've now created 8 apps, and I don't have a single scrap of software engineering or data science qualification. I'm all self-taught, but I have completely moved through that emotional arc I was talking about. I'm an example of what's possible using technology, but in all of this process, I've not had to engage a single supplier, a single contractor, and I've also in the past developed software where I've had to spend over $100,000 doing this, engaging, a team of 20 people. So I'm an example of the displacement in terms of not having to engage people. I've done it myself. So if you extrapolate that out to general businesses, you can see the knock-on effect. It will have an impact. And it'll change work structures, it'll change career structures, it'll change how people need to source work. So there's massive change happening.
So one of the things that you mentioned then was you were motivated to learn these new tools. And how does a 62-year-old female receptionist imagine an incredible future when she knows that almost every other receptionist job is getting replaced by an answering machine that will deal with 90% of the inquiries? How do you imagine that incredible future?
First part is awareness. You've got to sort of like start to sort of dabble into this sort of stuff and increase your awareness of what's possible. I think that aspect of the receptionist may not be motivated to do anything if the receptionist doesn't think she has to. If she thinks her job is going to stay the same for the next 5 years, well, then she may not be motivated to do anything. She's probably going to be motivated to keep doing the same thing. So it's either be aware of what is the risk of disruption for your role in your industry. That's the first step, is kind of not being in the dark, being aware of what actually is the disruption risk, or what is the possibility risk, if you want to turn it around into how is technology transforming roles? What are the new roles that are being created? If you are a receptionist, what are the possibilities of different careers that you can transfer into that you may not have even considered before? So it's moving from that kind of deficit mindset into a possibility mindset, but usually you need a catalyst for that. And usually what happens, unfortunately, is people don't think about this sort of stuff until all of a sudden they're called into the boss's office and they're given a sheet of paper saying, this is your redundancy notice. And they did not see it coming. It's completely come out of the dark. And of course they're shocked. And, obviously, they're shocked. And that's when they start to think about this sort of stuff, when they're forced to, because their circumstances have changed.
Yeah, most of the people that I know that have been made redundant, most of them would say that they never saw it coming. When I went through that list before, there was a whole bunch of jobs that are most exposed and least exposed. But if I was to tell you that the second most exposed jobs are ICT managers, office managers, finance managers, production managers, welfare support workers, university lecturers and tutors, cafe and restaurant managers, and sales assistants, general sales assistants. They're the second most exposed. And then if the middle group, this is where the registered nurses sit, the primary school teachers, the chefs, the secondary school teachers, the construction managers, education aides, lawyers, human resource managers, general practitioners sit.
Yeah.
So this is going to affect a lot of people in a lot of industries where people have spent years learning their craft at university or at trade school or however they've learnt their skills. So no one is somewhat safe.
If you look at Anthropic, they predict numbers like 40 to 60% of white collar workers, white collar roles are going to be disrupted. And like when I say disrupted, doesn't necessarily mean they lose their job, but they're going to be impacted by technology. This is the biggest change since the introduction of electricity.
Yeah.
It is different than any other revolution because it affects every single industry. And the interesting thing you said about the people who don't see it coming. Lee Hecht Harrison, which is a global outplacement company, they published research last year and they surveyed something like 8,700 people across the globe who have gone through their outplacement program. And they asked them the question, what's the reason for your redundancy? 12% of those people said it was to do with AI. Okay, 12%, only 12%. However, the same C-suite executives in the firms that are letting them go, 46% of them say, oh, no, it was AI. So that is a massive issue. If the people who are being let go don't know what the real reason for their redundancy is, what's happening is they're being put in a situation where they're still in the dark. And the logical thing for someone to do if you've just lost a job, obviously you want to get a job as quickly as possible. But if you've just lost a job as a bookkeeper and you're going out looking in the market for another bookkeeper, what's the shelf life of that bookkeeper job going to be? What you really need to be doing, or what employers need to be doing, is they need to take responsibility and tell them the truth, because this is structural. This is a structural change. And some people are going to have existential crises, because the point you made about spending your whole life establishing a career, getting to where you are, our education system does that. I'm a Gen X. The education system when I went through, and I don't think it's changed too significantly, is you go to school, you get your ATAR or your HSC level, you go off to university, you get your qualification, you start your career, but it's about building expertise. It's about creating expertise, and that's what ends up defining us in some ways. That's our identity, our professional identity. And when that becomes eroded, if it's becoming eroded by technology, that's a massive issue, because it's like, well, where do I pivot? What career? What are the alternatives for me? What tools do I need to learn? What capabilities are going to make me indispensable? They're the things that I'm working on.
So I'm a late 50s female. I've been listening to this podcast, and I'm in one of those categories where there's likely to be a high amount of exposure to AI displacement. What can you tell that person right now? And what can you teach them or advise them or tell them that what should they do right now to get on this path that you're talking about?
Okay, well, I would say right now, firstly, don't be naive. Don't be in the dark. Be aware of what is happening in your profession, in your role. Be aware of your disruption risk. That's number one. Number two is start building those capabilities. You've got two kinds of things you need to build. One is the human part of you, to amplify that and make it brilliant. Strengthen what makes you indispensable. And then the second part of that is you've got to develop those technical digital capabilities like prompting and using AI, because that's not going to go away. It's just going to intensify. So two parts of capability building. And then the third part is be more independent and show more initiative and start applying these tools to disrupt yourself, to disrupt your job, to disrupt your business, so that it doesn't happen to you.
Very good. It reminds me of a movie I saw many years ago called Up in the Air. It was about a fellow that his job was to go across America to visit companies to make people redundant. And his mantra was he used to do this with dignity. It starred George Clooney and Anna Kendrick. And in one of the meetings where he was making this fellow redundant, rather than follow the clinical, you're being made redundant, here's your package, review it, come back tomorrow if you've got any questions, he said to the fellow, I've looked at your resume that when you first joined this company 20 years ago, and it looks like you've studied the French culinary arts. And the fellow said, yeah, of course I've done that. And he said, well, how much are they paying you to stop you from cooking French food?
Yeah.
And the fellow said, that's something I've been wanting to do all my life. So it's that moment where you can take the backpack off and say, I don't need that anymore. I'm going to do what I love and do what I want to do. And that's part of this exploration you're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, for me, it's all about reimagine your relevance. Stay ahead of that curve, but reimagine, because there's a massive opportunity for possibility right now to use technology. You be the sovereign person. You use technology as a tool to amplify, to be brilliant, but but to really gain an advantage for you. And that's totally possible. But it's not possible by not immersing yourself in it. The other thing is you've got to put in the effort. This is not a 5-minute instant gratification scroll on LinkedIn, kind of thing. You've got to put time and effort into doing this.
Yeah. Well, there's one thing that has really come very apparent with the people I'm working with, and what I'm seeing is that the older generation tend to have that life experience. They've got the discernment. They can call a spade, and they know when the AI's made a mistake. And they certainly got a good sniff test or a sanity radar. And it's those people that they're the ones we need. Someone who's 25 years old sitting in front of a keyboard writing code or creating apps won't have that discernment. But the people that will understand the impact of those tools and know how they work are the people who have got the life experience to bring that discernment to any situation, whether it be a job, life, home, wherever that discernment is needed. And that's why the older generation should have hope. I've worked with 40 companies over the last 10 years, and there's always someone that's been there for 25 years that knows everything about how that company works. And they're always that go-to person. They're like a walking encyclopedia. You cannot automate that person.
No.
And so they're the people that they need more than ever. And when companies go through redundancies, what do they tend to do? They make the older people redundant, but they're the ones that know how everything works.
Well, they're the ones with the relationships. They're the ones with the connections, like they're the ones who have seen it before. And that's the thing with, these AI projects is it's not just a matter of who can code. It's a matter of who's going to implement these projects. Who's the one, who's going to be successful, creating the kind of like dealing with the resistance from people who don't want to do it. Who's going to motivate? Who's going to lead? Who's going to that they're people skills. They are absolutely people skills. So, you need relationships, you need connections.
So you've mentioned earlier that you've been quietly beavering away, learning how to code, vibe coding as they call it in this new language. What have you been working on? What's your interest?
Well,
I'm building capability adaptation infrastructure for individual sovereignty in a tech disrupted world. So in a nutshell, basically what I'm building is the software is to support people to get the most out of technology, to shift their relationship with technology from one of fear to one of excitement and curiosity and leverage. So it's a series of apps. There's 8 at the moment, and they range from focusing on awareness raising, which is my first one is called Insights. And it's about being aware of, for your role, what is the technology disruption risk? What are your indispensable human capabilities that are going to give you an edge? And how are you going to learn this? Whether it'll recommend either books, courses, or podcasts. So that's the first one. The next one's about coaching and skilling and prompting. So fundamental capability building. But then at the other end of the spectrum, I have tools around ideating new businesses. So if you are someone who doesn't necessarily want to play with an employee structure anymore, you might want to be independent. You might want to, you've always had an idea. I wonder if, or wouldn't it be great if, that sort of thing, like whatever it is, like you may have something that really annoys you. This could be your opportunity to fix it by creating your own product, creating your own service. And so technology can enable you to conceptualize that and to turn it into a structure. And if it's technology enabled, you could be creating your own businesses. So 8 different apps. The domain is adaptandthrive.ai. I have a central intelligence called Crystal. That is the diamond. And the symbolism of the diamond is multifaceted, and it's about illumination. So rather than reduce you to a lowest common denominator or pixelate you into a fraction, it's about amplifying what you're capable of and really inspiring and motivating. So that's what the business is about. And it's moving them through that journey so that they can adapt to start with, but then really start to thrive.
So just take me back to that first one. The first one was awareness. So it's like, it's almost like a virtual coach or another person you can bounce ideas off.
In the structure of the tools, 8 tools, but each tool has 2 layers. So the first layer is a diagnostic layer where it is AI supported, but it's based on 30 years of my IP. So I've got expertise against cognitive capability assessment, capability development frameworks, career management, career transition engagement, and so forth. So I've used all of my expertise to create my own AI agents, if you like. So the first layer is a diagnostic layer, and then the second layer is where Crystal, as the central intelligence, she activates whatever the outputs are of that layer 1. So within insights, it's about learning, and you might be given, these are your areas that you need to concentrate on in terms of technical skills, technological skills, digital capability, or your human indispensable, the Thrive ones I spoke about earlier. She'll activate those. She'll say, this course at this program, here's a book summary, this is what you need to know about this, this is why you need to know that about this is where it's going. So it's like a massive immersion in education, because that's the first part, educate yourself about what's going on. Yeah. And so each of the tools have a diagnostic and then Crystal as a activator, whether it's her as a coach or an execution guide for how you can implement AI tools to scale your business, to make it more productive. So it's a continuum.
So just hear me out here. We've got Barbara. She's 56. She's been a receptionist at a medical centre for 20 years.
Yeah.
She logs on to your tool.
Yes.
Take me through, what sort of questions does it ask? It's in the context of the receptionist.
Would it be useful for me to show you?
You can if you like, but you just need to talk through it, Pamela, so that people who are listening can understand what you're talking about.
So what Barbara would do is she would meet Crystal in the starting point. So she'll click on this, and what Crystal will do is she will take you through a process of understanding where you're at in terms of your current, emotional sort of where you sit when it comes to technology and change. So on that continuum, are you in the kind of comfort zone, or are you the mover and shaker at the other end? So that's the first part of it. It's understanding what your goals are from a career perspective. So are you wanting to retain your relevance? Are you wanting to amp up and, really be a go-getter and start a new business? Are you wanting to redirect your career into something totally different? So what are your career goals? What's your underlying competency when it comes to technology currently? And on the basis of all of these different threads, she will recommend the right tools for you, because the tools for you, Bruce, are going to be different than the tools for Barbara. And even Barbara being a receptionist, there might be Nancy, who's also a receptionist, and she might need different tools because she's coming from a different direction. So it's recommending the right tools for you based on where you are currently in your career journey. And that's the way it works.
So what would be, if Barbara might come out of this process, and would it give her a report or an assessment, or what would she receive going through this?
Depending on the tools, at layer 1, she gets a report.
A report, okay.
All of the layer 1, you get a report based on the actual tools. So whether it's based on coaching sprints, or whether it's based on learning recommendations, or whether it's based on a blueprint for AI, on various tools that you can use to either amplify or optimize your job, you're going to get a report in all of those first stages. And then the second part is you get an AI guide who's been trained on your report to help you execute your report.
Okay, like a career coach.
She's your career coach over your lifetime.
So I'm just thinking out loud here, and let me know if I'm off track. If your company's going through a massive reorganization through AI and a whole range of different things, because the economy's not great right now, and it doesn't have to be a disruption because of AI. It could be a disruption from any other reason. So let's say, for example, a company then said to you, we've got 200 employees, we've got 50 of them to put through the program. Is that how this tool would work?
Absolutely, yeah. It would support people through that change. And what it does, in addition to, say, a traditional outplacement. So the thing with outplacement is outplacement only ever starts once a decision has been made to terminate someone. So it's pretty much transition from one employer to the next step, which usually is another job, not always, but more often than not, it's another job. So what I do, which is different, is I start well before that. So it's about building those capabilities so that you don't have to make the redundancy in the first place, because it could be that the people are upskilled or reskilled and they're rocking, they're contributing all of these new ideas on how to add value in your business. So it's starting well before, but should the situation arise that unfortunately you have to make these decisions to let people go, then if someone's going to leave a job, when they move into the next job, they want to understand what the disruption risk of that next job is, because there's no point, jumping out of the fire to get into the frying pan. So, they've got to be able to use discernment. Is this a good bet to go into this kind of role? So it's giving them awareness around that. And it's also, helping them navigate into emerging work structures, which are going to be very, very different, or are already very, very different than what they've left.
So if there's any 56-year-old receptionist like Barbara out there listening to this podcast, you're looking for people to work with you to road test it?
Yes, I'm currently pre-launch. Right now it's pre-launch. You think everyone's going to understand that, and they don't understand it. So, that sort of user feedback is really, really important. And what I'm learning to do is to learn not to be precious.
Yeah, so it's new. Yeah, so what I mentioned was that nobody wants to be told they've got an ugly baby, right?
Right. But I'm learning. This is something I guess I have learned, that sometimes even though you never want to hear it, you're right, you don't want to hear your baby's ugly, but the negative feedback, as difficult as it is to hear, is more often the most valuable.
Yeah.
It's the stuff that causes you to, once you picked yourself off the floor after crying for 3 days, it's the stuff that enables you to completely pivot and say, right, I'm going to carve that up and redesign it.
Well, I've done projects. You would have heard of the waterfall concept in IT, when you build something and you go through a sequence of steps and you don't get till the very end, till you test it or even deploy it, defined as a failure. And I've been there, done that, got the T-shirt and the cake. So the earlier you can get frank and full feedback, the better placed you'll be for when you get down the track. But you've got to get a lot of it. It's not just one person looking at it. You've got to get a lot of people. So if you're in that awkward space at the moment out there listening to this podcast, and you're looking for maybe a career change, or you're looking for some ideas on what you do next, or you're looking to how to navigate your current situation, then how can people reach out to you to participate in a trial or a proof of concept with you, Pamela?
Yeah, the best way would be, I'm on LinkedIn under Pamela Frost. But another way is simply to go to the website, adaptandthrive.ai, and ask Crystal. Just ask Crystal.
It's free, right? You can just start using it.
It's a free tool. Ask Crystal, and she will guide you. I will see that data. But maybe kind of ping me a note and just let me know you've done it, so that I can
get some feedback.
Because that would be the ask. It's not about giving away free tools. It's about giving away in exchange for feedback. So that's what I'm looking for.
Well, the idea is that one of the best ways to work out whether something's useful or not is to give it to somebody, let them use it, and then take it away. So I did that experiment with my 13-year-old son. We gave him a phone when this was many years ago, and I was able to, through my internet provider, switch off the internet so he couldn't access the internet because he was using the internet too much. I found out very quickly what happens when you give something that's very useful to somebody and then you switch it off. You see what the actual consequences are. That's when you know you've got a good product. So
in this product testing phase, I am keeping a tight pool on that, because I take feedback very, very seriously. And when you get feedback, from the best respect I can give someone if they give me feedback is to act on it. So if I'm acting on their feedback, it's kind of like I'm trying to keep it contained so I can keep on top of, the enhancements. Yeah.
Well, I think you're onto a growing market because unfortunately there will be quite a fair bit of displacement, not just right now. For once things settle down a bit, the tools get better, people adopt them more rigorously. So
Yeah,
we'll put some show
absolutely.
notes together, and so how people can contact you and how they can log in and try the tool. And then you're also looking for family businesses as well.
Yes, family
To try
businesses.
it out.
Family businesses are a really important category. For a start, they employ something like 50% of our working population. So, they're a massive, massive sector employing people. But I believe they care. They care very deeply about their people. Like you said, there's been generations and loyalty, and they want to do the right thing. So I'm keen to work with employers that want to do the right thing by their people.
So inside an organisation, if they're big enough and they've got a HR manager, is that who you would normally work with
Yes, I
this
would work
kind of
with the
stuff?
HR. I would work
Yeah.
with the HR manager. So like we said earlier,
Yep.
the best projects are those that bring HR on in the early stages. They become collaborators in the development of technology and the deployment of technology rather than being left to do damage control at the end. So I would support that HR manager.
Yeah, yeah. So thank you for sharing all of that today. I've found this conversation utterly fascinating. Well, there's one more thing that we need to do, and it's this podcast is called the Hitchhiker's Guide to AI Governance, because Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is probably my favourite book. But I've got a second favourite book, and should be able to see it now. It's very relevant for what we're discussing. So as always, with all of my guests, I ask them to tell me a number between 1 and 150.
57.
57. Now, that is a good number. Now, we'll go to page 57. Now, this is a quote. Every page has got a quote on it. So, on this particular page, it says, "Smooth seas do not make skillful sailors." It's an African proverb.
How amazing. Smooth seas do not make
Skillful sailors.
So, if everything's going along hunky dory, what are you going to learn? Like change and disruption are the biggest opportunities for learning and growth, because it puts you in a position where you're out of your comfort zone. Like I used to use in my coaching a lot. When you're in your comfort zone, you're not growing, you're not stretching, you're not being challenged, you're not being confronted by anything. It's when you put your foot outside that comfort zone and you start to feel uncomfortable, you start to feel, oh, I don't like this. Our bodies or, our minds, they don't like that either. So it's like, well, if you don't like it, do something about it, because it ain't going to go away. Isn't going to go away. I should use proper grammar. It's not going to go away. It's only going to intensify. So look at it as a learning opportunity. Look at it as a catalyst for massive growth and massive transformation. And if you can have that mindset, and I appreciate not everyone is there, and it is a journey, and that is said with absolute respect. I do respect people who feel anxious about technology, because I was there 3 years ago, but it is a huge opportunity for growth.
So that was "Smooth seas do not make skillful sailors." You've been listening to the Hitchhiker's Guide to AI Governance, the podcast for anyone trying to make sense of intelligent machines, messy politics, and everything in between. Today, we spoke with Pamela Frost. Pamela is an expert in career management over the last 30 years, and she's developed some new tools to help people navigate this wonderful world of AI.
Yes.
So thank you for joining us today, Pamela.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone out there, for listening.